Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jocelyn Udibe. Today, I'm going to be looking at our my return to in-person learning series, and we're going to talk about incorporating mindfulness practices into the classroom. So let's start out with just an overview of mindfulness. To put it simply, mindfulness is an act of paying attention and focusing in the present moment without judgment. That's really the huge piece of this, is that without judgment part. It's being aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations through the lens of acceptance. So why do we do this? In an educational setting, mindfulness has been proven effective in enhancing attention, reducing stress, and boosting retention. To learn, we have to engage our prefrontal cortex, right? So this is the area of the brain that is home to planning, to decision-making, to self-control, problem solving, and acting towards long-term goals. So all of those pieces that we need to learn and retain information. So what the science here suggests is that regular mindfulness practices can change our body and our brain's response to stress, strengthening that connection in our prefrontal cortex, while also reducing reactivity in our limbic system. So our limbic system, that's the system that controls our flight-fight response, which is more so important in thinking about when our students do return to in-person, right? They're going to be carrying in trauma. They're going to be carrying in anxiety. They're going to be carrying in fear and worry, and all of these pieces that may make it that they're more dysregulated. And so being able to help them find ways of reducing that response while also encouraging the growth in the areas of learning is going to be key, right? So essentially what this does is it supports self-regulation and self-reflection, which are crucial pieces for learning, memory, and retention. So when do we do this? Starting out our mornings with mindfulness activities can help us settle our students down to get them ready to learn. Mindfulness can also be helpful during transition periods. So for example, going to PE, coming back from PE, recess, lunch, any of those things, before and after testing. So especially deep breathing can be really helpful when before testing and after testing, so that students can help reduce some of that anxiety that they were feeling or are feeling. Wrapping up the end of the day can also be helpful. You can encourage like questions to ask students that can help them with social emotional exploration. So some of the questions that I proposed were something along the lines of, what was something that made you smile today? What was something that made you happy today? What's something that was disappointing for you today or made you sad or mad, depending on the age of your kids? And then what's something that you learned or something that you achieved today? So all of these questions, they can either be encouraged to meditate on that, or they can share their thoughts, or they can write them down or journal, but these can be incorporated as just parts of the day. So let's take a look at the types of mindfulness. I'm going to focus on 4 different types of mindfulness. And each of these areas, there's different ways to practice each area of mindfulness that I'm talking about. So what I have here is mindfulness through breath. So when we are stressed or anxious, we often take very shallow breaths in our chest. You might have seen this when people get kind of panicky or hyperventilating. The breathing tends to be quite shorter, right? That type of breathing. But when we breathe deeply into our bellies, you can use that breath to actually calm your bodies and your mind. So to practice mindful breathing, I have a really short example of how to do that. But you would place one hand on your belly, the next hand on your chest, and rather than feeling the movement in your chest, you're trying to expand your belly. So you can count to 3 and do an inhale of 1, 2, 3, and then exhale 1, 2, 3. You can encourage students to close their eyes if that's something that they feel comfortable doing. Not all of our students are going to feel comfortable doing that. You can try mindful breathing yourself, and then you can incorporate it into the classroom after you've practiced it. I think for, again, like I said, there's many ways to adapt this. I think for older students, having like visual representations. So if you've seen some of those spheres that kind of expand and grow and then contract to represent breathing, that's something that can be used for some of our older students. What I have here on the slide is called pinwheel breathing. This is a really fun activity I've done when I've ran groups. It's creating an actual pinwheel, which could be just a fun activity to do with kids. And then they would blow on it and they can see the actual movement of their breaths. There's also something like a hot chocolate breathing you may have heard of, where you pretend that you have a cup of hot chocolate, you breathe in, so you're breathing in the steam, and then you blow out and you're pretending you're blowing away the steam. And that's another one that's really helpful with kids. Really thinking about different ways that you can incorporate that deep breathing, and what would be helpful for your student and your age group that you're working with. One that I often teach students is following the pattern of their hand. And so inhaling and then exhaling. And the reason why I like this one so much is because, and you can also use the palm of your hand. And so inhale, exhale, inhale. The reason that I like this one so much is because it's really accessible, right? They don't need anything. They don't need the pinwheel. They don't need a representation. They have their hand, it's accessible, and they can use that as a pattern. And it's pretty discreet. So if they were just at their table, it's something that they can do pretty readily. And that can be helpful. As I said, this can be incorporated multiple times throughout the day. It could be incorporated in the morning during transitions, and again, before and after testing, and really looking at any difficult situation or transition that students might have. This could be a time to incorporate that. Let's go ahead and take a look at mindfulness through the sensory experience. So our next slide. Thanks, Josh. So sensory experiences also help children focus and relax. So you can try and listen to music or calming sounds in the classroom. You may also try going outside and just listening to sounds, nature sounds. You can, one of the things that I think it was on, I think it was on NPR. I saw that if you even incorporate like nature sounds into the classroom, even though they're artificial, or if you were to display images of like, a state park or something like that, or even certain smells, like I think pine cones or something like that. Anything that really elicits kind of that nature sensation or elicits kind of an image of nature helps reduce stress. So incorporating those things in the classroom, I know some teachers have displayed like on their projectors, like the background might be of some trees or something like that. That can help to reduce stress. And what that's doing is it's incorporating our senses into that. Another technique can be playing an I Spy games. That can be done in the classroom or outside very quickly of, who can find 5 things that are green, or who can find something that has wheels. Again, they're using their senses to be present-minded and present-focused. I put on there the mind jar. I think for COVID, this can be adapted. Mind jars are typically where there's like familiar smells or items with familiar smells, like say like a cinnamon stick or something like that. You could put it into a jar and kids kind of guess what it is, and they're using their senses to do that. Obviously, with safety regulations, that's not something we can do. But I think that if we adapted it with something of like go outside and, a blade of grass, taking into consideration like allergies or whatnot, or a stone or whatever, and you can incorporate your senses into what does this item feel like? Does this item have a smell? Does this item, can you describe the color? Can you describe the feel of it? Any of those things to incorporate our senses mindfully. I also have on the slide, you can see the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. I know a lot of people are familiar with this. I've gone over this before. So it's using your senses, and then you can see on the side, it's what are 5 things that you can see, what are 4 things you can feel, what are 3 things you can hear, what are 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. I've adapted this one as well, either in session or just even in my personal life with my own child, of using it in the sense of like, what's 1 thing that you saw? Can you describe it to me? And again, that can help distract a person's current state and put them in a state where they're focused on a single item, and it brings them back into the present. So that's a really helpful, easy technique to use. So moving forward, we have mindfulness through guided imagery. So guided imagery develops children's imagination, which is wonderful. it also helps to integrate learning with prior knowledge. So when you start a new topic in the classroom, this is something that you can incorporate into guided imagery. If you're, for example, studying the ocean or animals or the forest, beach, any of these kinds of things, volcanoes, whatever it is, space, you can create a story and have kids walk through that story with you. And that can look like, they can either close their eyes, again, if that's something that they're comfortable doing, or they can have their eyes open and just kind of walk through it. Again, this helps increase imagination, and it can be very relaxing, and it can also energize kids. So I have an example of how to do this. You can see the floating on a cloud one. Lie on your back and close your eyes. Again, obviously with safety regulations, we may not be able to do that, but this is something that can be done just in their chairs. They don't have to close their eyes, but it could be simple as, imagine you're on a big fluffy cloud imagine a big fluffy cloud floating above you. See it come down gently beside you. Imagine what your cloud looks like. What color is it? Does it have any shapes? This is your special cloud. It is where you feel safe and happy. Climb onto it. It can take you anywhere you want to go. What do you see? What are some things around you? What are some things that you would take? And then you would come back to a state of calm and quiet and feeling peaceful. I recommend that when you're, as you're ending this, you can always end it with a few deep breaths to help settle students. But again, I think it would be really great if you could incorporate things that are like within the classroom or topics or curriculum that's currently being presented in the classroom. And then finally, we have mindfulness through movement. This is probably like one of my favorite ones because I think that this can be very adaptable to either energize or to calm someone down. But humans, right, we're born to move. Movement is a part of how we learn. It's a part of how we interpret our environment. It's a part of how we gain information. So what this does is this introducing movement into the classroom really taps into students' natural way of learning. And yoga is a really great example and strategy for adding movement into a student's day. So children can either, they can mimic their environment to develop their self-expression and self-confidence. They can practice yoga in their chairs, in the gym, outside. Really, it doesn't take a ton of space. And for any of those movements or poses that do take a lot of space, use your discretion. If it looks like that's not something that's doable, then obviously there's so many different poses or different examples of what you can use. This is also another one that you can incorporate things that you're studying in the classroom. If it's particular animals or whatnot that you're studying around the world, I think that also can be adapted. So if it's like a cobra pose, if you're learning about certain animals, or the cat pose, rather than being the cat pose, if you're learning about animals in Africa or whatever, it could be the lion pose. But it's a fun way to incorporate movement into the classroom. You can also look at, for example, there could be books and different, I have actually an example of a resource as we move forward that you can see where you can actually just have a video and kids can watch the video and have movements. For me, this is something I think oftentimes I talk about something that I do, like an example from my life or something like that. And I think the reason I do that is that I want to give the example of how this is practical. This is something that I also do in my own life. It's easy, it's accessible, and it's a small change that I make. And I've seen like big gains. So in our family, we have this little toddler baby yoga book, and it's how we end our night with our son, who's 3. And he loves it. He thinks it's so great. And this is one of the books that we always read to him. And so it starts out with all of this practicing deep breathing. And then from there, it has these cute images of little babies also doing these poses or animals. And what I've noticed is that halfway through the book, there's this pose for him that's called the frog pose, where he gets to hop around. And he hops from one end of the room to the next end of the room. And I can see his energy go up. And it's such a shift because I can see him from deep breathing where he starts to kind of mellow out at the end of the night to this particular pose where he loves it and he gets super energized and he's so bouncy, to the end of the book where he's doing this like sloth pose. So he just kind of lays out on the floor and he comes right back down. But I think that's just an example of how with these different poses or with these different movements, you can go from a really energizing state to a really docile state. So really thinking about what do your students need in this moment? Is it in the morning time when they need to calm down because of transition? So maybe incorporating a particular type of mindfulness or a particular type of movement. Or is it something like after lunch when everybody's kind of drained and tired and you want to incorporate some really energizing type of movement or energizing type of mindfulness to help boost them back up? So really thinking about your class or your students in your site and what would be helpful for you. So I recommend trying to pick one mindfulness practice and starting out with yourself. What's something that's going to be helpful for you or really accessible to you? And then introducing it or adapting it to your students in your site or your staff or whatever it is. And again, even if it's for 2 minutes to 5 minutes or during transitions or for a brain break, incorporating some of these things can help again to, increase retention, increase self-control. That was the one I was thinking, self-control. All of these things that could be really helpful in the classroom. So again, and moving forward, if this is something that's tried out, you might want to try introducing a new mindfulness practice either every week or month or term. And it can either be from just one of the 4 that you focus on or incorporating new ones. So for example, if you're focusing on just deep breathing and that's something that you do in your classroom or at your site, 1 time a week or 1 time a day or whatever it is, you can have it set up to where you're trying a different type of deep breathing each time. So, maybe when you're starting out on Monday, it's doing the hot chocolate deep breathing. And then on Tuesday, you're going to be doing the pinwheel deep breathing or whatever it is. But mixing it up so that there isn't necessarily that kind of stagnation that can happen with some of these. And another fun thing to do is that you could incorporate like a mindfulness leader. So somebody who kind of leads the activity for that day or chooses the yoga pose for that day or the deep breathing technique for that day. So that could just be another fun way of incorporating this into the classroom. And finally, if we go to the last slide, I can show you some of the resources that can also be helpful. So I have MindYeti. MindYeti is a subscription. It does have a cost to it, but there's some free videos that's on YouTube, and that one's really helpful. It's got some deep breathing techniques. They're pretty short. I've seen them from like 1 minute to 10 minutes. There's Cosmic Kids Yoga. I've talked about this one before. I really like this one. I've used this before when I ran groups during ESY, and it was just a really quick, easy, fun way, interactive way to get movement into the day. I recommend checking it out. There's typically the videos incorporate like kind of pop culture trends that kids are into. So there's some videos about like Baby Shark to Minecraft. I also attached to our Mindful Monday groups, like all of their videos and stuff, just as examples. And then I have a blog for the activities, for classroom mindfulness activities that can be incorporated into the classroom that you can do with children. And that's where I picked that pinwheel image. So I recommend checking these out. They've got some really great tips in there to just kind of peruse and see what would be helpful in your site or in your classroom. Thanks, Josh. And to just kind of a quick look at. So it talks about the steps of mindfulness through breath, through sensory, through guided imagery, and then also through movement. And then of course, there's those resources that I presented and talked about with the links attached to it at the very bottom. So all of this is a very clean, easy, like one pager.